It is my pleasure to almost introduce our speaker, but to be introducing the person who's going to be introducing our speaker. I also wanted to let you all know something that you might not be aware of. I know that everybody is joining us from around the world, and in the spirit of empathy, I just wanted you to know that our keynote this evening is about 1 a.m. his time. So just want you to know that we're all trying to feel your pain as well. So with that, Justine, please introduce our speaker this evening.
Awesome. So today we're honored to have Mr. Daniel Moa-Makua, who is joining us all across the Atlantic from the UK. And so thank you once again for joining us at 1 a.m. your time. A Cal grad, Daniel is the founder of Buanga Sustainable, an investment advisor, a sustainable farming advisory through public-private partnerships. He advises governments on agricultural policy, rural development, and investments in agriculture. He has also developed farming as an asset class for international institutional investors. Prior to establishing his firm, Daniel has had extensive experience in the financial world as a global investment executive. And through numerous projects spanning sustainable farming jobs and combating food insecurity, Daniel is committed to contributing to a strong and sustainable sub-Saharan African region. And with that, let us welcome Daniel with the exciting presentation he has in store for us. Daniel, please.
Right. Can you hear me? Because it's strange speaking to a screen. But if that's you can hear me, then I'll proceed with the presentation.
Why don't we, in the spirit of it's late for some, why don't we do a little hand raise? Is there anybody who like, let's see. Looks like a lot of people can hear you. At least 12 people, Daniel.
Okay, so I'll just proceed. Thank you, Jasdeed, for this kind introduction, and thank you, Victoria, for inviting me to this prestigious lecture. Good evening to all, and good afternoon, actually, to all. I've put together a series of slides that I will use as support to the sharing of my journey as an entrepreneur. I'll just flip through those, and then we can get to the Q&A. I will start with the formative years, and that's École des Ponts et Chaussées Engineering School in Paris, where I did my undergraduate. This is me in the yearbook of iHouse in 1984, Department of Hydraulics and Coastal Engineering. And this is me in Davis Hall doing some soil test with equipment. As you can see, there is no laptop at the time. This was followed by a stance of 1 year in the Navy as a Navy officer in France in the department or the Office of Strategy and Planning, where I worked with a senior officer of the French Navy on looking at strategic issues. Very conventional background, one might say. Then there's the early years of my careers, about 10 years in quantitative finance. I worked with Dr. Bar Rosenberg, faculty at UC Berkeley Economics, on the founder of the modern portfolio theory, and who is now, I understand, the dean of the Yigma Institute, which is northeast of the campus. And there, it was essentially working on capital markets, equity trading, construction of portfolio, and also growing a business which went from about $1 billion under management to, at its peak, over $100 billion under management. That was followed by a period of general management, so promotion to senior management role, and the company was acquired by a French company, AXA, and this is their headquarters in the city of London, where I stayed a good 10 years. And there, what I did is corporate restructuring, planning, strategy. And so just to pose here, this is me, essentially a very, very conventional person grounded in quantitative finance, data analysis, programming. And then there is a trigger, and everybody goes through his trigger. And my trigger was 2011, where I had this realization that we had a world with a population that were growing exponentially. And this is a really, I'm sorry, I don't know if you can see the chart, but the most relevant thing is to see how fast the population is growing. And this takes us from 10,000 BC, where we had a few hundred million, less than 100 million people, obviously, to 7 billion people. The second trigger was a warming of climate, and where we started to see that this was acknowledged. And for me, as somebody who's from the capital market, I thought there may be a trend there. Whereas we'd just gone through a trend of low inflation, economic growth, a lot of markets that were very strong. We had extremely volatile markets, and I thought that it was time for me to look at something new. The combination of those essentially means demand for food grows exponentially, and then supply of food is impaired. So you have a squeeze. That means that owning the meal production is the most strategic thing to do. And therefore, I just took a parachute and no plan B. And I went to Nigeria, which is the largest country in terms of population in Africa. And there, because I had spent the maximum 30 seconds on the tractor, then I started a farm again, kind of a learning. It's learning by doing, so to speak. And so this is me arriving in the town of Bauchi, literally.
Daniel, I'm going to interrupt you only because you're acting like it's not a big deal that what you did, but you were in investment banking, you were comfortable, you had at that time the job that everybody wants to have. When you said that you went to Africa, can you take us a little bit through what it actually involved to do? I mean, talking to your friends about this, figuring out where you were going to go. Would you mind just breaking it down a little bit?
Yes, I think not even to my friends. I mean, to my wife. It's just like, what's going on? Why leaving this comfort senior role in the City of London for something which is so fundamentally different? But
how old were you at that time?
So that's I was early 40s.
Okay.
Yes, no, actually a bit later, mid 40s. So again, this is not a time when you take these big risks, but this is also me. I grew up in Cameroon, and we'll see some of the pictures of people from my village. And so I just needed also to experience or do something in Cameroon. I grew up as a patriotic person, so I have a deep care for people as well. And so in this instance, it was to, yes, following a trend, but also experiencing something that I hadn't experienced whilst in the capital markets. It comes with a lot of compromise. I remember the first day I was preparing for this trip, I just Googled the place, and it was just the early days of Boko Haram, and all you could see is torn villages, and so I was going into something which was not an easy place to go to. But there was a little bit of me being strategic about things, right? Because you do need to differentiate yourself. And so if you join the queue and go to Abuja or to the main towns with no knowledge, nobody will care about you. Whereas here, I just went into something that was strategic. As you might know, the Lake Chad is a geopolitical unstable region. We were just before the start of immigration into Europe, so there is a lot of interest. And then there's a slide also that touches on governance and these aspects. And so going there, I went it was essentially a contrarian move, which is to say, how do I get to be relevant in a place where I have no knowledge? because I literally written off all of the knowledge I acquired in the city. And so this is me. And then the next slide is just, yeah, this is me again, you know, which is, we didn't want to spend money on a tractor and we said, well, let's start with 30 hectares. And then the first season, we did sorghum and we did cowpeas, black-eyed beans. And it was really a discovery for me because I saw that we could create jobs. And there's this tension between human capital and capital invested. This is expense as opposed to capitalized. This is salaries as opposed to a machine that doesn't create jobs, effective. And then on a risk-adjusted basis, you know, you can have a 200 horsepower tractor and you wreck it the first week because you don't have the skill to run those tractors. And so this was also a bit of a eureka moment for me, just to see that we could create jobs, we could create livelihood in an area which was subject to very significant stresses. And then, you know, and behind this there is hope. There is, you know, when you start having hope, when you calm down and then you can plan, and then society, you kind of reconstruct the social fabrics. And then there was also this realization, I mean, this is a picture that was taken and within a matter of seconds, literally, you had all those children. It's quite interesting because at the time you were quoting 140 million people in Nigeria, and that was 2011. And today people quote 206 million people in the country. So we have 70 million people or children that were born in the last 10 years. You know, so this for me is also a significant realization that there is a massive issue that, and then yes, I did a lot of strategic planning and I can fight my corners, and then just having these, and then we'll touch on some of those key things, which is, you know, observing and people, but you know, I observe something, I'm an informed person, and I could then think about what do I do with that. These 2 years were followed by what I call on a mission, because I find my base and I just try to wiggle my way back to the top. And this is the situation, which is a school that was torn by Boko Haram, a lot of destruction. I was sent there by the governor of the state of Maiduguri, and that's, if you heard of the Chibok girls, that's really where this thing was happening. And I was, you know, again, going upstream where people would be very comfortable in Lagos State and or in London for that matter. I was going to the heart of the, you know, this issue, but in doing so, I became an expert. This is one of the coolest pictures I have. My children think I'm a complete spy. You know, I'm wearing church brogues, and I'm in 30 kilometers away from Maiduguri. And this is in the middle of the insurgency, and you have drilling for borehole. You know, I think they're drilling at 1,500 meters just to get some water for irrigation system. And here you have guards that are ensuring that there is no attack. And this is again something that I learned, right? If you want to, in this environment, be respected, have access to authority and power, then if they send you 30 kilometers out of the town without protection, you just have to say, listen, whenever I'm ready, let's go tomorrow morning. And so this was a great experience. And then the next one was again on a mission, and so this time it's the World Bank and trying to provide support to refugees and having somebody to go and check that this was happening adequately. And so these were like the longest 500 meters of my life, because we were out of Maiduguri and we had to leave the car and walk to see where the farmers were. And frankly, what I've learned as well is that the most courageous people are those that not like me, that are not privileged and that have to live in those regions. And we'll touch on people, but this is where you have to be, have empathy and engage with people, respect them, and by doing so, you know, it's kind of successful way to get buy-in from those stakeholders.
So Daniel, I just still have a question for you. When you came to Africa, did you know a lot of people already? How did you engender trust with the people that we saw that you were in the field with the people that you were going to all the missions with, so that you could see and be part of this?
No, I didn't know anybody. Um, so what's really critical for me is to say, who are the decision makers, who are the informed people, uh, am I adding value to them, so then they'll provide protection. And so then if I go to my degree, I will certainly not go for a short walk. I will go where people ask me to go, because I'm their responsibility. As soon as you deflect from that, so there is also to really understand where the authority and the power lies, and to cultivate that and to be relevant to them.
And what did they think you were doing? What did you tell them you were there to do?
Well, I'd met in London a gentleman who is now the #1 of health at the World Bank, and he understood that what I was interested was to create opportunities and jobs in the rural areas. And so he did make the introduction, and then it was up to me to buy my ticket and find my way. And then, as it often is the case, then you are just introduced. I remember being introduced to the governor. So governor of Borno State, it's a state that has 6 million inhabitants. So you are introduced to somebody who's elected, like a governor in America. And they're extremely powerful. So if you're introduced to them, you just have to be relevant. So if you speak about job, don't speak about 100 jobs, speak about 10,000. And then, you have an evening to figure out how you are going to advise, or how you're going to, what does it mean? And so here you then have to, I thought about the Roman army, or for the army of Telamon, where, you had, how did you organize an army, and where you had the basic skill of a centurion, which was a sword, a spear, and a shield. And in this instant, for a farmer, you have your basic instruments, and then but you have to perfect the way you do it, and then you have to build an organization around it. So, and I find that this is where all the planning, the quantitative finance, etc., were just coming back, and then this ability to know how to learn, because you become quickly relevant, and then you do have to be really alert, actually.
That's helpful for framing it. Thank you.
So then I have a couple of slides on things which I thought were fundamental. So observing. So if I go to a place, then this is a very important place, because it's a marketplace. What you have is post-harvest season sorghum. And so this is a market. You don't see the trucks, but those trucks will take the sorghum, which is a cereal, down to the places, Lagos, of the main town. And so there is you could literally count the bags. The bag is about I think a bag is, I'm not sure, $20 a bag, and so and if you could take a cut of 5%, then that just gives you an idea of turnover. You look, and so you start to build the economics, and you start to see how relevant this place is. There is a lot of misconception, right? Because we think that it's really poor, but actually they are, like in the New York Stock Exchange, you have what you call locals. And so here you have locals. So you have somebody who can lift, I was told, like 1 million bags. And then they will drive the market, so that they will push the price up. And then as the season goes, then they will start selling into the market. So we have mechanisms that we are very, very familiar with working in the city. And then you also need to know how to engage with people, because a trader is a trader. Wherever you're in New York, you're from New Jersey, or you're from Bajoga, you're a trader. And then if you know how to talk to them, then they respect you, and then they will bring you in. The other aspect of observing is that we need to go around the world. And so here I'm in Belize, right? So in due diligence on the investment into farming, and at the time they were trying to farm maize and red kidney beans. So the maize would go to Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico, and the red kidney beans would go to the Caribbean islands. And I've seen change, right? Because this is extremely negative for the carbon emission, right? Because it just destroys the forest. This is a Mennonite. So Mennonite communities are, you see them as Amish in Pennsylvania. They came in the 50s. Very, very good farmers. You see in the back one of the sprinkler of a pivot irrigation system. So we're kind of contrasting two sides of the world. Does 12 tons per hectare. And this is investment that an investor who lived in Carmel Valley Road was doing. So you have to have this understanding of flows and interest, so that you can see or monetize opportunity, and monetize. If you do it for the benefit of the people, then they have the means to sustain themselves. It's just a matter of where do you put the cursor, but you do have to be smart. The second one is people. So again, just a remark. These are people, pictures that I took my father passed away, so I went to the village and I took those people. But I would say that empathy, understanding of culture is really important, understanding of needs, observing, and more importantly, getting the buying and support. So and then by people, you have people in authority, you have to address them a certain way, and other people. And so your ability to maneuver and to navigate this is really, really critical. And so I think that my lesson in that is, yes, it is very emotionally, we want empathy, but we'll touch on negotiation, but the hard bargaining often doesn't take place in those markets. They take place in dark room in Accra. People arrive in the Cayenne Porsche, and then you negotiate. And if you want to run a country, or if you want to be effective in these social issues, you do have to understand the politics. Otherwise, you're completely irrelevant. Transforming, this is also really fundamental, which is you have current means of production. So this is, we actually about 1 kilometer or 2 from Lake Chad, so really up north. Again, the perception that there's no water when you drill at 10 meters and you get to the shallow aquifer. But it's a tube well, very, very inefficient way of irrigating a field. This is UC Riverside, way near Conchella. And I went there to visit because I was looking for gene banks for tangerines. And this is a latest technology or current technology in drip feed irrigation systems. And so I think again, we do have to be relevant. So it's not just about traveling to those places, but it's also about being able to be as alert and as relevant in a discussion on high technology matters as you are in looking at something which is very inefficient, but in many cases does the job. Authority. So this is one of the, as you said, did I know this gentleman? No, I didn't know him, but he is an emir. He has authority over 500,000 people. Again, this is a picture where my children think I'm a complete spy because you can spot that I'm not a local, but you do have to cultivate these relationships, and this is the other authority. So here we have if you want something to happen, you have to engage with communities, and communities have their authority. In this instance, it's the emir. Then you have in blue the state governor for the state of Bauchi. Then you have in white on the right, you have a minister in the federal government. So you have a federal government. And then in the middle, you have Martin Brennan, who used to be executive director of iHouse, but prior to that was at the State Department ambassador to U.S. ambassador to Angola. And in his retirement, and it shows the seniority that he has in the State Department, he was interim ambassador to Nigeria. And so this is really the people you need to reach out to, because they are the decision maker on any project. And that's where you need to think about scalability. You have to be relevant. So if you're too small, you will never get to a stage where you can make your case to people who can facilitate your work.
Daniel, it's interesting to me looking at these pictures and looking at what you're wearing, that when you left London, I think you were probably wearing double-breasted pinstripe suits.
Yes.
Or suits not unlike the ambassador is wearing. But here I see you in, I don't know if you call them robes.
You call them a gandura. And by the way, this is like the pinstripe, right? So this is a tailor in Maiduguri. And then the design is specific to Lake Chad, around Lake Chad, so people know that this is being acquired. And the ethnic group is the Kanuri people. The cotton fabric is high-grade cotton, and so people would know that you are a person of authority in a way. And you know, clearly you don't walk into those meetings dressed in jeans or the equivalent of your jeans. Because you are with a person of authority.
Is this something that you knew from having been born in Cameroon or from growing up, or did you have to do some research on this as well?
Well, I remember when I was working, there's a firm called Cazenove, which is like blue blood firm in London. And I was working at Rosenberg, and we were in our genes, and they were interested in measuring the performance of his stock plans, long-term incentive plans. And so I remember just, that's when I went to get my first pinstripe suit and then my brogues, because, you know, that's a uniform. You know, if you want to be taken seriously, you just have to dress the par. You know, it is very important to also understand what do you want? Do you want results, or do you want to make a statement? And frankly, if you want to make a statement, you don't survive in this situation. And if you want to results, then you have to get to understand how authority works, how things works in the background. Yeah.
Thank you.
Negotiation. This is very important as well when you work at scale, and it's true anywhere. So this is a very Spartan house that I was given. I spent 2 years advising the board of the Ghana National Oil Company, and you have to be very discreet. You have to be, you know, stick to the script. And then in doing that and in being technically competent, then you become an advisor. And then you get access to all of the most important and relevant, critical contracts of the country. And this takes you to negotiation, and we are back in the City of London. This is a 25th floor of the Stock Exchange building. We're in the law firm of King and Spaldings, and we are negotiating, 1,000 pages of agreements on the import terminal for gas in Ghana. Then this is another picture, which is in Abidjan, the headquarters of the African Development Bank, where we are following up on financial instruments to provide support, to credit enhancement support, so that the project is bankable, as one says, so that impact investors can invest safely. So negotiation, again, we're back to an environment which is unfamiliar, but the substance of what we do is very, very familiar. And it requires really diligence, competence, and persistence. Gestation. So I think that I'm just I closed on a founders round, so I can say I'm an entrepreneur now. This is a gestation. So this is a period spent in San Francisco at a friend's house, thinking about my next step, my next move, and working throughout the day and throughout the night. And this is also so once we significant work field experience, you want to create something, and that's a period of reflection, I think. I have my slide are not completely in order, but this is a statement which I think is for me, it's very important. It says, Marines leave no one behind. And given the situation in the world, you know, we have, I've just characterized this, but, you know, we have people, the environment, you know, generally people who live below poverty line that are very, very vulnerable. So that's one of the person that we don't leave behind. The second one is the environment. This is a tree, but it reflects a forest, it reflects the biodiversity, etc. And then finally, the wildlife. And so this is a chameleon. I took that picture near Lake Chad, and it was the most interesting, one of my favorite pictures. So yes, we are at a stage where we shouldn't leave anybody behind. We have to operate at scale, and it requires tremendous amount of skills, and it is tough. So I would see that you know, going into impact investing or looking after communities, yes, there is an element of soft social, but for me there is an element of ruthlessness that one has to be fairly aware of. So I think that's it. I have a couple more slides on my new venture, but I think I would keep it as such for the moment.
I know we already have a question from Andrea. I think, Andrea, I'm going to actually see if you want to come in and ask the question kind of on the stage, if that's okay, just to do that. And while actually I'm going to ask Rishi or Swetha to look for Andrea and bring her in so she can ask her question. But I am curious to know, Daniel, when I have talked to you in the past, you've told me that your mission is X, and I just want to know if you can kind of reiterate what your goal is. I certainly can say what I understand, but I'm just wondering, in all your work in Africa, going there, what is your goal?
So there's a sense of urgency, and my main concern is population growth. I mean, you've seen the chart, and in the work and the business that we are founding, we say we're on a mission to save the world biosphere. It is to say, so how do we address this issue of reduction carbon emission? How do we address this issue of deforestation? And then when you look at the deforestation, really behind this is more than these two factors, essentially. One is governance, where you have corruption, and corruption leads to land or forest sold to make, you know, a banana plantation or palm oil plantation, or in Guatemala, what we're seeing is that you have cattle ranching, or in Brazil. And then behind this, yes, you have you know, everybody wants to eat meat, but if we have good governance, then people will realize that it is not in the long-term interest of a country to do that. The second one is population growth and the context of poverty, where you have you have an energy shortfall that is met by firewood and charcoal. And then we're currently doing I'll show you those, but we're currently doing some research that shows that one of the consumption of the forest is essentially people needing to cook. And why do you cook? Because you need to break your cellulose and your starch, and so that you can digest them and turn them into glucose. So, I mean, these are fundamental needs, and they are not met, and they are requirements. And so we are seeing some devastation going around the world, and frankly, we need to address the population growth. So this is a business. So, but at some point, it is politics, right? So. I'm currently advising some government in Africa on their policy. From my experience, I worked with a gentleman who was running for governor, but each time intellectually it's very stimulating. It is also perfecting my understanding of things, which is how do I run a country? Not that I would be doing this myself, but how do I advise on how one runs a country?
Wow.
In the interim, it is creating a business, but yes, that's my drive, which is.
So it's so interesting to hear everything that is way up here, and now we have a bunch of questions with people wanting to know. Wait, everything is way up here. How do you just do this? So Andrea, I don't know if you want to turn on your video screen again, and you can go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, I wanted to thank you for your time and insight. I came from a third world country and I grew up there, and so I really resonate with your emphasis on empathy and like gaining trust by showing that you respect the way of living. So I wanted to ask you if you ever really experienced like a clash with the political leaders when you were discussing these initiatives, and how did you handle that?
Yeah, so I wrote for my daughter, and I called it The Way of the Shadow, and it was reflecting on how do I do things, and I tend not to clash. So when I would say that if I'm dealing with political issues, I will be discreet. You won't see me, or because there's no real interest to be in the limelight, and you just have to know when to withdraw. I mean, I did competitive judo, and judo requires you to to wait for your moment and to use the opponents in some ways in order to achieve your results. So I haven't experienced, and you just have to be fairly alert. Don't put yourself into a position where you might be at risk. So I remember being in Nigeria, and we were meant to go to Bauchi, and I had a difference of opinion and a clash with a person, and I said, I just can't trust him, so I will not go to Bauchi. I find myself in a situation where I was totally uncomfortable for various reasons, and I just said, well, I'm sorry, but there is a problem in my family. I have to go back to London, and everybody understands that that's reasonable. And so I don't know if I answer your question, but it is you do have to be very, very alert. You do have to understand that people can be offended, and just have to find really graceful way of avoiding confrontation. This said, you do have on occasion to show that you are tough, and so in these instances, you particularly in the context of negotiations, you do have to show that you represent authority and that you exercise your judgment and you're reasonable in being extremely tough just to make a point and just to ensure that you achieve the objective that were given to you to the extent that those objectives are reasonable.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Shall we take a question from Daniel? Daniel, you want to come on the line?
Hello. It's so nice to have someone who's my namesake here also. And fun fact is, I'm from Nigeria, spent 18 years there. I lived in Kaduna. It's also in the north, it's close to Abuja. So when I heard you talking about Bauchi in Nigeria, it hit very close to home for me. My main question is, you started off farming with, you said 30 hectares or acres, I'm not sure which one I heard. And then you switched into advising governments and people in power. I know very emphatically that the people in Nigeria, and especially the northern leaders, and at the time when you were doing it with the Boko Haram and all of that, everybody was looking to the next person as either the cause or not the cause or something like that. And amidst all of that, you were able to rise through the strata. I want to know how you were able to do it. Did you have, you said you didn't really know anyone, but then you knew someone who introduced you. But through these introductions, were there any points in time where you felt like they were colluding against you, or you felt like the play was against you? I want to know how that switch was for you from farming to advising governments.
Well, the switch was pretty obvious because it was no longer safe, right? So going there by myself and the farm was, but typically you arrive in Abuja, which is the capital city. You have a 5 hours drive to Bauchi town, and then you go to Das, which is 40 kilometers, and then you go in the bush for 20 kilometers, and that was where the farm was. So I had to stop, but the 2 years gave me a fairly good grounding into what farming was, at least from an advisory point of view. I think the key thing is, how do you determine that you can trust the person? And then you just need to learn those things. And so the first introduction is done by somebody that I'm introduced to by somebody that I trust. And then I you just have to profile the person and make a determination that you can trust the person. And then you go on like this. And in fact, what was interesting is that whereas people in Das and for that matter in Bauchi felt that they really didn't understand why I was so excited about having this. And many people in Lagos thought that I was completely mad. Until the day the US ambassador to Nigeria came to visit my farm. Right? And then all of a sudden you had the governor and you had the ministers and everybody was there. And in a way that was, and the comment of the ambassador was to say, you really need to brief my staff because this is really useful. I mean, the US ambassador going into a region which is hostile to the American interest was really strategic. And then that's also a long play, if I may say, because then I gain access to the US embassy in Nigeria. And then by gaining access to the US embassy, I gain the respect of the governor of Borno State. And I remember sitting in a meeting where they asked me, we have issues, can you be of assistance? So I think this is these dynamics where you have to be pretty quick on your feet and then pretty alert and always relevant.
Thank you very much. You touched the questions and you answered them completely well. I also wanted to ask, on the scale of 1 to 10, how scared were you to actually be in Borno during the heat of Boko Haram? You said you were about 30 kilometers out from Maiduguri. That must have had something to do with the kind of person that you are.
I was between, since you are from the region, I was between Bama and Maiduguri. So I think that this is where you have to be measured risks. Uh, if you want to be respected in some parts of the world, you have to take risk like anybody else. If you arrive and you want to have, and so I did my fair share of taking risk, and I have the respect of statement, and therefore I don't need to take risk again. But yes, the first time you are sitting in a car driving at 150 kilometers per hour, doing a 1,000 kilometers, you kind of wonder, why am I there? And then the drivers are tired and they stop in the middle of the night. But you know, you do it, and then you also have to overcome your anxieties. You know, I think that's yeah.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Ronnie, I think, had a question that he wanted to ask next. Thanks, Daniel.
Hi. So following up on Director Howell's question that she asked earlier, throughout your presentation, you mentioned the importance of relationships, relevance, and results, and especially the importance of all three of these when you talk to the local authorities in order to help drive your project. So how did you establish appropriate baselines when moving into a new space in a new geographic region?
You do a significant amount of research. So at the moment, we are looking at two countries in our new business. We're looking at Romania and Guatemala, and then we do a lot of desktop reviews. So you have in-depth research. And I remember in Nigeria, I knew literally every villages of a state. I knew every hill, I knew every roads, and so in conversation, you're more knowledgeable than most people, and then you do have to tune into people, which is you dress like they dress, or you understand the culture, and so that they become comfortable with you. And then as they become comfortable, you engage on matters of interest to them, and you're pertinent. So you also need to understand what pertinence means. And that is to understand what's relevant to the person.
Makes sense. Thank you very much.
That's fantastic. I think Abrar, if I pronounce that right, Raman has another question.
Yeah, I think you got it pretty much on the dot. Hi, Daniel. It's really great to hear from you. So my name's Abrar. I'm a CS major here at Cal, and I've been thinking about going into quantitative finance. However, coming from a third world country, Bangladesh in my case, and having seen these global issues that you're so knowledgeable about, like corruption, poverty, and environmental issues firsthand, I want to do something relating to that in the long term as well. So I guess I would like, my main question is, if I want to have the biggest impact on the world around me, should my career trajectory prioritize making like a lot of money, building up a good resume before transitioning to social impact roles later in my career? Or would it be smarter to just start out with one single-minded objective and work through it for 30, 40 years in a row?
I think it's very difficult to I think it's a path for you know, we all have our path. It's a matter of understanding how you respond to opportunities. I think in my instance, the conventional route gave me a significant grounding in analytical skills, and perhaps my family background, being, you know, both French and Cameroonian, meant that the more intercultural was something that came naturally, and hence this ability to communicate. So I cannot, I think what you need to do is to be persistent, to be competent, to be alert. I think that these are some of the attributes that means that in any situation you will end up winning the day, so to speak. And then you have to have a sense of empathy, understanding of people as well. So there's a hard part, and then there's a soft part. There's a book that I really like. Is the Book of Five Rings, and then it's a sword master of the Honda clan in Japan, yeah, it's how do you know, being trained as a samurai. You need not only to be fit, but you need to be incisive. You need to be extremely knowledgeable, so that you're extremely alert, and you constantly to have this level of intensity that means that you're effective. I think that those are attributes that probably will help you and then making money. I don't know if I would say making money is really what, it's being relevant, having content. You can make money without creating anything, right? So you do need to build, be able to build to be relevant, I think.
Okay, you've given me a lot to think about. Thank you.
Excuse me. Swetha, would you like to see if Elizabeth would like to ask her question?
Absolutely. Elizabeth, are you there?
Yes. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for speaking with us. So I was wondering, so I'm currently studying plant biology at Cal, but really I'm interested in making a social impact. So I was kind of wondering mostly how you transition between fields, kind of from engineering to investment and then investment to what you're currently working on, mainly because I'm kind of interested in like combining these passions. And so I was wondering if it was really from using like transferable skills or more from like networking.
I think it's transferable skills. My undergraduate was in it's a French system, which is mathematics, abstract maths in particular, and therefore it does help to transition, because you try to find a substance in any of the area that you engage in, and also having a drive to learn, to go back to fundamentals. So I think that you should have the comfort that you can pivot, you can change. It will take effort. It's painful, but once you learn how to learn or to pivot, then you do it. It becomes easier as you proceed. But I spent quite an extensive amount of time, 10 years in quantitative finance. I was doing only one thing, and then another 10 years where I was doing strategy and business management. And so they worked this really extended period of time where the fundamentals were. And so I would think that as you start, you do have to start with things or a subject or a role which is formative, where you really have and surrounded by people who give you an opportunity to have a really strong and deep learning. Biology is particularly interesting at the moment. I'm looking at biodiversity, biosphere, and trying to really understand resilience of ecosystems and understanding that actually to make those systems resilient, you need to have as much flora as you have fauna, right? So as we go forward, as we're trying to save the world's biosphere, this is going to be, I think, a really critical subject to be really knowledgeable about.
Yeah, totally agree. Thanks so much. That was really helpful. I think, yeah, I'm graduating soon, so I'm starting to think about what I'm doing next. So thank you so much.
And then you have a tremendous amount of VC money going into this field, right? So the startup world is actually starting to offer a lot of opportunities. And what's interesting about startups is that you raise capital on an idea, and you form a team that will develop the idea to a point where you create a product, or you monetize things, or you create opportunities for impact investments to deploy the capital. So, yeah.
Thank you. Swetha is going to ask a question from Amy Ambrose. But Amy, I just want everybody to know, works at the Simons Institute. And without Amy, I would never have met Daniel, because we were in conversation and I told her about the Newton Distinguished Innovator Lecture Series. And she said, oh my gosh, I know the most fascinating man who was recently the iHouse Alumni of the Year. So Swetha, ask Amy's question.
Absolutely. So Daniel, Amy asks, how long and how many hours did you put in before you started to feel successful? But digging kind of deeper into that, would you be able to talk to how you stay persistent and how you're able to stay motivated to continue working so hard?
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm successful. I think I think there was a really sense of achievement when I closed this founders round, which is somebody committing. We started with $600,000, and this was just 6 months of work, right? And prior to that, you had all the experience that I had. So there was a sense of achievement. And then we are thinking about our safe rounds. So these are all jargons that I've learned in the last few months, where we will be raising probably $5 million. And then we currently signed a chief scientist who is a really senior person who worked as advisor to FAO, which is a Food and Agriculture organization of the UN. And we signed up some fairly young GIS programmers, and so we are now 5, and we'll be 11. So I think this is for the sense of creating something, which I find very interesting. And could you repeat the second question that Amy asked me? Yes, where do I find the energy? I think I just we're on a journey. So, and then also I have a daughter that's 11-year-old. So I find myself on the pavement of London on my, going with her on a scooter. So you do have to, have energy, and that keeps you young, I suppose.
That's fantastic. I have a question for you, just based on hearing you talk. You all have just raised a good amount of funds.
Yes.
But here in Silicon Valley, we often hear that people have raised 10, 20, 30, $100 million.
Yes.
Why? What you're doing is making a difference in the sustainability of the world around us, as opposed to making an app. Why is the funding so different?
Oh, well, I think that funding is a question of scalability of what you do, and when you do an app and you reach out to really significant number of people, there is more opportunity to monetize your app than you otherwise. And so in this instance, we're dealing with extremely complex systems. We're dealing with a significant amount of risks. And you may find that you're quite significantly diluted. So I think it's a fundamental of capital markets, right? So you have in Silicon Valley, I would say this is more of a momentum play where people, there's a precedent and people could see that they are companies that are well established, extremely large market capitalization, that can just buy into new ideas once they've been proven in terms of the product itself. Whereas when you are in an area which is new, then it's more difficult, I think, to raise capital. So yes, I think that I feel raising that money is we second round at 5 million, and then but first rounds are never really more than a few $100,000 to $1 million. Safe rounds are probably around the 5 million, and then when you go to your Series A, you probably get to 50 million. So we are thinking about a safe round with a valuation of aiming to sell 10% for 2 million, so about a $20 million valuation. So we've worked for 6 months to a year, and we have an implied value of potentially $10 million. So I don't think it's a bad valuation, and then what we intend to have is, and in fact, I can show you this, which is, I just had a slide. So this is this is what we're building, right? So we will be identifying areas where we can protect the forest. So we looked at a property in Belize where there was about $10 million of carbon, and for 5,000 hectares. And then we spoke to a private equity firm in Italy that was interested. They had 1 million tons of carbon to offset per year. So this is the investor on this side, and then the offsetter. So we can we completely our valuation will come from the fact that analytics will enable us to scan the whole world and then identify areas where reforestation can take place. In fact, we're looking at the Carpathian Mountain, where we looked at 500,000 hectares, and we made a determination through our analytics software that about 20,000 hectares could be replanted, and we have an allometrics model that tells us the growth in carbon. So I think that hopefully as we progress, we should be able to find scale. I'm working with the founder. He's the investor has 2% of Joule and was invested in Jawbone. He's also investing in vertical takeoff planes, electric planes in Germany. So I think, I don't know if I answered your question, but I think that we are in the path, probably not of this high rise, but $100 million is probably a Series B, a Series C, and not a founder's round.
That's great. I think next may be Destiny. I've seen your name on the stage for a while. Do you want to ask your question? And great.
Yes. Hello. Thank you, Daniel, for speaking to us today. So earlier in your slides, you talked about getting results versus making a statement. And I guess my question is, what's the most clear distinction between the two? And also, have you seen results that are favorable, and or how do you go about from just making a statement into getting real results?
Um, I think I might refer to a conversation with my daughter, and which is in the current environment, where we in the U.S. you have what I call make a statement and against achieving results, and so making a statement, again, it's a matter of opinion, but you know, if I take you know, I would raise my hand, and I do hope that we have a new administration that is more conventional post-election, and so there are many situations where you can make a statement, but it may not be beneficial to your objectives. Whereas, you know, results is probably requires a lot of effort not to get involved, and just stay focused. In negotiation in Ghana, you wouldn't see me, because what was required of me was to be very discreet. And what was required of me was to be very effective on the modeling and on the review of legal documents. And so you know, appearing on a newspaper or being in a hall of a very nice hotel was perhaps making a statement in some ways. But if we go back to, you know, I'm sitting in a rural area and I want to make a difference, you really have to be careful that your effort will be able to, you know, you will sustain over time. And so you do need to understand the who are the decision makers and whether they are committed, and how do you ensure that they stay committed. And sometimes that doesn't require you to be in the field. It requires you to, you know, engage with the right person, and not necessarily in Nigeria, but sometimes you could do it from, you know, wherever you are. And so there's this tension between wanting to do things which might make you feel good, and then achieving, which might require you to be more strategic and perhaps less visible.
Thank you.
I think we're going to try for about 2 more questions, and Mike has joined us and waited patiently. Mike, your question?
Hi, Daniel. Thank you very much for coming here, talking with us tonight. So as a foreign national, is it very, I mean, interfering with government affairs on that scale is a very difficult affair on its own, but trying to change I mean, in organizations such as government, as a foreign national, can be quite difficult. Could you describe your experience making impact as a foreign national?
Yeah, so I think it's true for most countries, because government and politics is clan mentality, right? So even companies, right? In Royal Bank of Scotland, if you're not Scot, then you know, at some point you can't progress. AXA, if you're not French and from the right schools, then you stop progressing. And likewise in Ghana, it is the same, or in Nigeria. But what's important as a foreigner is that you are not relevant to the local politics. So long as you stick to the script, right? You're there to do something, and don't get involved in local politics. Don't take sides, don't express your view, and be discreet. And if you do that, then you become a quantity that is unpredictable, that is effective, and for the person that the member government you work with, once the terms of your contract are come to an end, then you fly back to base, but the day you decide to stay and get involved, then the dynamics will completely change. So I think that's something that I guess I understood, and I was particularly disciplined in. In fact, my website, if you go to my website, there's only one page, right? So, and that's now things have changed, and we will have a proper website. But when I was doing all this advisory work, the expectation was that I wouldn't put a lot of pictures of me in Lake Chad and me in various places of the world.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you. Daniel, we're kind of closing down on the hour. I think Swetha is going to put the access code up. I think she can, but as she does that, I'm wondering if you can think back to yourself as a student at Cal and this incredible news that you're sharing with us today. And if you have any thoughts that you want to share with the students to leave them with as they start their journey. You've shared so much about what you think is important, but anything in particular that you might say to yourself when you were at iHouse, excuse me, I think I said iSchool, I meant iHouse. Anything that you would share with yourself, or any thoughts you want to leave with this group as they also try to change the world?
Yeah, I think I wished I was less anxious and more confidence in the future, or in my ability to do things, and spend more time maybe enjoying or leaving the moment. Instead of being totally rushed into, making sure that I get good grades. I think grades are very important, but so I think that was, if I were to go back to Cal, then perhaps that's how I wish I would see things. Given the current context, it is quite possible, it is daunting actually, the situation we're in. And so, I was again just referring to my daughters, and we are going in London into the second wave. So we're kind of bracing for ourselves for a big hit that is coming. The number of infection is risen really significantly. And then what we're seeing is that the schools are starting to behave like they did during the Second World War, when you had the bombing taking place, where you have a rationing, where we had to, stay calm and carry on. So I think we and that's perhaps where the difference will be made, because we need leadership. The world is facing big challenges, and those challenges all represent opportunities. I was able to raise money in the middle of a pandemic, and we are going on to the next rounds because we are completely relevant. And it is one has to have the same degree of confidence, albeit in a very unstable and certain environment. And as I said, in such circumstances, you really have to overcome your anxieties, and then just find another level of calmness so that you can use your judgment, you can proceed, you can progress as you would into a more conventional environment. Frankly, we're likely not to see conventional environment for quite a number of years. And so I think the new normal is something it's really, as I said, really daunting, but it's doable. And so within that context, one has to look at things with a great sense of peace and confidence.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your unconventional journey with us, and also your piece. I'll close off there with hopefully with maybe a round of applause. Thank you very, very much, Daniel.